The most dangerous threat facing the world today may not be hidden in a classified intelligence report. It may not be lurking inside a secret weapons program or a decision that's been made yet. What are the chances that it could be a pattern? A pattern so old that it has survived kings, emperors, revolutions, world wars, and the rise and fall of entire civilizations. One that has appeared so often throughout history that some scholars believe it acts like a gravitational force, pulling nations toward conflict even when their leaders desperately want peace. And if that sounds impossible, consider this. Some of the smartest military strategists, historians, and political scientists on Earth are studying a warning written nearly 2,400 years ago by a man who witnessed his own world tear itself apart. The disturbing part is not that he predicted one war, but that he may have identified the structure behind many of them. Because if he was right, then the world's two most powerful nations may already be following a script written before the birth of Christ. And if history has anything to say about what comes next, the ending is not reassuring. We often like to think that the future is an open book, shaped entirely by the choices of modern leaders, the shifting tides of economics, and the latest breakthroughs in technology. But what if the greatest threat to global peace today isn't a sudden, unpredictable crisis, but a script written more than 2,000 years ago? What if the world's most powerful nations are marching toward a catastrophic conflict, fully aware of the danger, yet seemingly powerless to change course? To understand the modern friction between the world's biggest superpowers, we have to travel back to the 5th century BCE, to the rugged, war-torn landscapes of ancient Greece. There, an Athenian general and historian named Thucydides sat down to chronicle the devastating war between Athens and Sparta. Millenniums later, political scientists looked at that ancient observation and realized it wasn't just a footnote about Greek history. It was a structural law of human behavior. Today, we call this phenomenon the Thucydides Trap. It is a severe, recurring geopolitical pattern that occurs when a rapidly rising global power threatens to displace an established ruling power. When that happens, the resulting friction almost always leads to war. The dynamic is driven by two incredibly powerful psychological and strategic forces. The first is the rising power's arrogance. As a new nation gains massive economic, technological, and military strength, its worldview naturally changes. It expects more influence. It wants a greater say in global affairs, a seat at the head of the table, and the power to redraw spheres of control to reflect its new reality. It views its ascent not as an aggressive act, but as its rightful, hard-earned place in the world. The second force is the ruling power's paranoia. The established nation, which has spent decades, sometimes centuries, building the global rules, securing the trade routes, and anchoring international alliances, looks at the newcomer with deep suspicion. It doesn't see the rising power's growing confidence as a natural progression. Instead, it sees it as a direct threat to the international stability and peace it worked so hard to establish. When these two forces collide, ordinary diplomatic friction gets dangerously amplified. Minor miscalculations turn into massive provocations. Trade disputes become economic warfare. Technology sharing becomes a matter of national security. Every action taken by the rising power to defend itself is viewed by the ruling power as an act of aggression. Every action taken by the ruling power to maintain the status quo is viewed by the newcomer as an attempt to encircle and contain it. Eventually, both sides begin to view a military clash not as a worst-case scenario, but as an absolute inevitability. To see just how deep this trap runs, researchers at Harvard's Belfer Center decided to look back at the last 500 years of human history. They wanted to see how many times a rising power challenged a ruling power and how those confrontations actually turned out. They identified 16 major instances. The results were sobering. The alarming part is how ordinary the triggers were. History rarely explodes because leaders wake up one morning wanting catastrophe. Wars often begin because of misunderstandings. A naval encounter, a disputed island, an assassination. A military exercise interpreted as a threat. A radar signal misunderstood in the middle of the night. The public usually sees the explosion. What they never see is the mountain of tension that accumulated beneath it. The Thucydides Trap argues that by the time the spark arrives, the firewood has already been stacked for years, sometimes decades. And that is precisely what makes the theory so unsettling. Out of those 16 historical cases, 12 ended in devastating war. It happened in the 16th century when the rise of France challenged Spain's dominance on the European continent. Again, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the rapid industrial and military rise of Germany challenged Great Britain, creating the volatile web of alliances that ultimately exploded into the First World War. Time and time again, the structural stress of a changing guard created a vacuum where a single spark, a royal assassination, a border dispute, a misread diplomatic telegram was enough to set the world on fire. But the history lesson isn't entirely dark. 4 of those 16 cases managed to avoid war. The most notable example occurred in the early 20th century, when the United States rapidly outgrew the economic and industrial power of Great Britain. Instead of fighting, Great Britain adapted, slowly conceding control to the U.S. in a transition that was remarkably peaceful. It also happened during the Cold War. The rise of the Soviet Union posed a massive challenge to the United States, yet the conflict never turned into a direct, all-out war. Why? Primarily because of a terrifying new variable: nuclear weapons. The guarantee of mutual assured destruction created a baseline of caution that overrode the natural impulses of the trap. When modern political analysts, military strategists, and world leaders look at the globe today, they see the Thucydides Trap playing out in real time, on a massive scale. It is the defining geopolitical relationship of our century: the United States, the established global giant, versus China, the rapidly rising superpower. Every headline we see today fits seamlessly into this ancient framework. When we talk about sweeping tariffs, the decoupling of supply chains, or restrictions on advanced microchips, we aren't just talking about economics. We are looking at the ruling power trying to protect its technological edge while the rising power pushes to achieve total self-reliance. When we look at naval maneuvers in the South China Sea or the intense geopolitical chess match over the sovereignty of Taiwan, we are looking at the exact geographic flashpoints where structural stress could easily turn into kinetic conflict. Chinese President Xi Jinping has explicitly invoked the Thucydides Trap during high-stakes summits, warning that both nations must find a way to cooperate to avoid a catastrophic collision. The challenge of our time is whether modern statecraft can outsmart ancient human nature. The core takeaway of the Thucydides Trap isn't that war between the United States and China is guaranteed. History is an advisor, not a dictator. The takeaway is that the structural stress makes a conflict incredibly easy to trigger. When the systemic tension is this high, standard diplomacy is no longer enough. Avoiding the trap requires an extraordinary level of deliberate, careful statecraft, a willingness to share power, and a mutual understanding of each other's deepest fears. Imagine two trains traveling toward one another on the same track. Both conductors see the other train. Both understand the danger and do not want a collision. Just like with big tech creating AI, no one wants to be the first to slow down, to appear weak, or surrender their position. The closer they get, the harder compromise becomes. And don't be mistaken, this isn't about hatred. The problem is momentum. History shows that momentum can become more dangerous than aggression itself. Because once enough political capital, national pride, military investment, and public expectation are involved, leaders often find themselves trapped by forces they helped create, and nations can become prisoners of their own narratives. There is one final detail about the Thucydides Trap that leaves me absolutely concerned. The most dangerous moment is not when the rising power becomes stronger or when military spending increases. Hell, not even when tariffs are imposed. For me, it is when both sides become convinced that conflict is already unavoidable. Because once leaders begin believing war is inevitable, they start making decisions based on that assumption. Military buildups accelerate. Diplomatic trust evaporates. Worst-case scenarios become official policy, and every action taken to prevent disaster can end up bringing it closer to our shores. That is the true trap. Not military power, not economics, not ideology, belief. The belief that history cannot be escaped, that the future has already been decided, that someone else will eventually make the first move. And that leaves us with a question far more unsettling than whether America and China can avoid war. I don't know about you, but this is concerning. The real question, how many leaders throughout history also believed they still had time, right before they discovered they didn't? As we watch this global rivalry unfold, the question we must ask ourselves is whether we can learn from the 12 failures of history or if we are doomed to repeat them. It proves that you don't have to see the future to understand the pattern. You just have to listen to the past. Until next time.